Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. This is the weekend edition where we interview notable people from the world of real estate investing. Today is no exception. We have a great guest all the way from northern Utah. Welcome to the show, Max Hansen.
Hi, Victor. It's great to be here with you today. Another beautiful day in northern Utah, throughout the West right now. We don't have the cold temperatures that you folks have back east.
Yes, indeed. Well, great to have you here. Max, you've been on the show several times. You're a specialist in tax-sheltered things of many different types, 1031 among them. And I'm excited to have this conversation. We're talking mostly about fractional ownership and how that can play a role in investing strategy. But maybe for the folks who haven't met you yet, perhaps give a little bit of your backstory and how you got to this point in your journey.
Okay. I started practicing law back in 1976. I helped facilitate the first 1031 exchange for some clients of mine back in 1978. I've been a practicing attorney in Montana, Idaho, California, and Utah since that time. Actually owned an exchange company. American Equity Exchange was one of the first 1031 exchange facilitators in the Rocky Mountain region. And I ran that business until 2018, sold that business to Accruit, LLC, which is the company I work for now. I'm one of the managing directors for Accruit and work along with a team of four other attorneys within the Accruit organization to help folks structure these 1031 exchanges that they're doing. That's where I've been in the last 50 years now in that 1031 space.
I love it. Well, Max, obviously most people listening to this show, our audience, are sophisticated investors. They certainly know what a 1031 is and, some of the restrictions that come with it, as well as some of the benefits that come from that particular structure. One of the things that is often a limitation, if you make an investment in an LLC and everybody then exits that, if you want to take advantage of the 1031, you basically need you're married, you need to co-invest in that 1031 if you did invest together, let's say as a syndication. But there are other structures that could potentially be more beneficial. Why don't you talk a little bit about that so that maybe folks don't necessarily have to be married for life, at least for tax purposes?
Yes, you mentioned ownership by a number of co-investors in an LLC. It seems like the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people when they acquire a real property interest for investment or business use, they form an LLC to act as the ownership entity for that property. That's problematic, as you indicated, when they go to sell that property. If they want to take the proceeds from that sale and go their separate ways and do their own exchanges or cash out of that investment, they sometimes forget that the taxpayer is actually the LLC or the partnership. So that requires either some advanced planning, to distribute the asset out of the partnership prior to the exchange far enough in advance of that transaction closing that they will have held the property as tenants in common for the requisite 1031 purpose, that is investment or productive use in a trade or business, to meet the qualified use requirement that's inherent in Section 1031. Or if they don't have that opportunity to do the advanced planning and an advanced distribution of the asset out of the partnership, they'll have to do the exchange, or they probably should do the exchange as the entity, acquire replacement properties that are held by the entity for a period of time after the exchange is complete. And in acquiring replacement properties, the entity has already determined that they're going to acquire separate replacement properties that are identified by each of the individual members. And they do a special allocation in that interim qualified use period so that the costs and operational costs and the profits and losses are kind of siloed as to each of the individual owners that are eventually going to own those individual properties. And then after they've met the requisite holding period, they'll end up distributing the asset out to each of the individual owners. So they now are separate and apart with regard to their replacement properties. So that's what we talk about in the industry. As we talk about the first option is the drop and swap, that is to drop the asset out of the entity and into tenancy and common interest, and then do an exchange or the 1031 swap into replacement properties for each of the investors, or perhaps one investor cashes out and takes the tax liability on for that portion of their transaction, or the swap and drop, that is where the entity does the 1031 exchange into replacement property, and then they hold it for the requisite period and drop the assets out of the partnership to the individual owners. Conversely, or on the other side of the coin, if somebody does a 1031 exchange, they have the ability to acquire fractionalized ownership interests in property, along with other co-investors, whether they're 1031 buyers or whether they're just investors in real property, and they're not in a position to acquire, say, a $50 million replacement property, but they're able to acquire a fractionalized ownership interest in that property that's been selected by the property sponsor that owns it and sets up that structure, that co-ownership structure. Those types of co-ownership structures are generally approved by the IRS. The main concern when somebody invests in one of those fractionalized ownership interests is to make sure that they're not classified as a security or a partnership interest, because under Section 1031, you specifically cannot acquire a partnership interest, which is an interest in an LLC or shares of stock in a corporation, securities. And
it has to be directly on the real property itself.
Yes, they have to own a piece of the dirt, essentially. Okay, the dirt or improvements. And early on in 2003 and 2002 and 2004, when we began to see these fractionalized ownership structures set up for replacement property options for people, IRS issued Revenue Procedure 2002-22, in which they outlined how a group of co-investors as tenant in common owners could acquire interests in a bigger property as part of a 1031 exchange. And as long as they followed essentially 15 requirements contained within Rev Proc 2002-22, that property interest that they acquire would not be treated as a partnership interest or a security. After 2002, during about the same period of time, some sponsors that would go out and acquire these properties as replacement properties for investors latched upon a different type of ownership structure that involved ownership of beneficial interest in a Delaware statutory trust that had been set up to hold a specific property, a large property that was being set up so that people could buy pieces of that pie, essentially. And the same concern existed with regard to those structures, those DST structures, I call them, or Delaware statutory trust structures, was that they couldn't be a security or they couldn't be a partnership interest. And the IRS issued a revenue ruling at that time, not a revenue procedure, but a revenue ruling 2004-86, in which they held that as long as the Delaware statutory trust structure was set up properly, that those DST interests would be capable of being exchanged into as a real property interest for purposes of Section 1031. And that's kind of the lay of the land now. We've seen increasing amount of sponsors out there, broker dealers that are selling these types of either TIC ownership properties or DST properties. And it's become kind of a go-to for a lot of people, that are doing 1031 exchanges, because there's a real lack of good quality replacement properties out there. Inventory of good replacement properties for 1031 investors is pretty slim. And
so define what that is when you say that. Is it just because they're the 45-day statutory limit to identify the replacement property, or is it there just isn't much out there?
I think I've seen. I think you can point to a number of different factors, and it's not. I don't have all the answers to this, but my experience after having done countless exchanges over the last 50 years is that there's some people that are perhaps like in the ag industry, ranchers and farmers, other people, Main Street business owners in the ag sector. They're looking to maybe downsize. And they're concerned about maybe not having all their eggs in one basket like they've had in the past, through multiple generations, perhaps. TIC ownership structures allow, and DST ownership interests allow people to diversify that reinvestment of capital into different types of properties, different geographical locations, properties that are maybe future pandemic proof, that are maybe better suited to certain types of economic situations or economic downturns that come up in the future. The other thing about fractionalized ownership interests that they can acquire, many of those are leveraged properties because the sponsor's taken on some debt to acquire the property and then get that property set up so that it can be resold as fractional interest. And the nice thing about that from some 1031 client's standpoint is that they're paying off debt on the relinquished property sale, and they need to either come in with new cash for the acquisition of replacement property or take on new debt or assume existing debt on the replacement property. The leveraged debt on those TIC properties or DST properties is non-recourse debt for the most part. That way they can acquire replacement property, take on additional debt, to offset the debt payoff that took place on the relinquished property sale, but they paid off recourse debt and they're taking on non-recourse debt, which is a real plus for them. So to go back to your question though, I don't mean to say that there's not good replacement property out there, single ownership, say no debt property, that type of thing in big chunks. But to find the right property is hard because there's just a low inventory. People have good property, they're going to hold on to that property. They're not going to put it on the market. So somebody who's a 1031 investor is going to have a hard time finding that. A lot of it's just the actual inventory of good replacement property out there, plus the fact that single ownership, no debt property is not the thing for them. Maybe they want to diversify into smaller pieces through different geographical locations, different property types, et cetera, to provide them an income stream independent of what they may have been involved with in the past.
Well, and it adds complexity because if you think about it, let's say someone is looking to replace $10 million and they're going to put $2 million over here, $3 million over there, $5 million over there, each with their own due diligence. You got 45 days to put this all together. Holy cow.
Yeah, or at least identify it. They have 45 days to identify, and then they have another 135 days after that identification deadline passes to actually pull all the loose pieces together and end up, with the properties they want. So it can be a pretty daunting task for people.
Well, not only that, it's not like you can treat the identification list as a menu in a Chinese restaurant. Where you're going to put 20 items on there, right?
Exactly. And it's probably a lot easier for somebody to go to a sponsor or a broker dealer for a replacement property, a fractionalized replacement property that has already done a lot of the due diligence. I mean, they've done their own high level of due diligence before they even talk to that potential investor. And the good sponsors and the good broker dealers out there, they want to have a good product to sell because they want satisfied clients that are buying those properties. And so the taxpayer who's looking to spend that 1031 money has already got a leg up if they're talking with people that have gone out there and they've got good properties in their portfolio that they can sell to that client.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, we send all of our investors over to you who are looking for advice on 1031. And so this is fabulous. Love the deep dive on this. Max, if folks want to connect, if they want to learn more, what's the best way?
Oh, they can email me. My email address is maxh@accruit.com, maxh@accruit.com, or they can call me at 800-237-1031. Whoever answers that phone will know how to get in touch with me. So we appreciate, Victor, the people that you've sent our way. Robbie Butler works with you, has done a great job helping clients get to us, get the answers sorted out, and dot the I's and cross the T's and get these deals done for them. We appreciate it very much. Look forward to doing a lot more.
Super. Well, thank you, Max. And for the listeners at home, you definitely want to get in touch with Max Hansen at Accruit.com. The links, phone numbers, email will all be in the show notes. And in the meantime, have an awesome rest of your weekend. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.